Welcome to a Community Partners interview where we explore the organizations, opportunities, and resources that look to make change in our daily lives. I'm your host, Davy O, and you're listening to Voices for Ability Radio. All abilities, all the time. Today, I'm joined by Ruth Wilcock, the Chief Executive Director for the OBIA of St. Catharines. The OBIA of St. Catharines is a provincially registered charitable organization. Their mission is to enhance the lives of Ontarians living with the effects of acquired brain injury through education, awareness, and support. Thanks for joining us today, Ruth.
Thanks so much, Davy. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on your show.
Oh, of course, and it's our pleasure having you. Now, to begin, Ruth, for our listeners who've been with us for a while, or those of us just joining us for the first time, why don't you give us a little insight into you? You know, what inspired you to work at the OBIA of St. Catharines and with individuals with disabilities?
Sure. I think, going back, I've been in the social services field for over 35 years now. And ever since I was really young, I was like, you know what, I really want to work with people and to help people. And that is what I've dedicated my career to. I have now been with the Ontario Brain Injury Association for 21 years. And it's interesting. A lot of people will say to me, so Ruth, what do you like best about your job? And I'm like, what I really like best about my job is the people. And it is the people that we serve, those with lived experience who have sustained concussions or brain injuries, and also their family members. And then wonderful people that we have on our staff and the whole field of brain injury. In my experience, there are so many dedicated people that start, when somebody sustains a brain injury, if it's a severe brain injury, they are maybe in acute care, they might be in a inpatient rehabilitation and then released to the community. And all through each step, obviously it's people that are helping those living with brain injury. And again, I think I have the privilege of working with the most wonderful people in the world, including, again, those with lived experience and colleagues.
And that is an absolutely amazing story to hear, really. And of course, it comes down to the people. I mean, half the reason we do a lot of the things that we do is because of the culture in and of itself.
Right. And I think that we're dealing with any person or we're talking about disabilities, we cannot lose the sight we are talking about people. We're not just talking about a structure. We're not just talking about care. We're talking about real people whose lives have been impacted.
Of course. And now, on the note of people whose lives have been impacted, in preparing for our sort of conversation today, I did a little digging, into your website and other sources of that nature, and I got to say that a lot of what I found really, took my breath away in the sense of how you even help out these people whose lives have been affected. On the one hand, you offer support groups and programs, namely, the Return to Work Project, including stuff like the Return to Work Project, the Brain Injury Speaks program, things of that nature. So do you think that you could give us, on that note, some insight into the Injury Speaks program, Return to Work Project, and then other programs and support groups that you offer?
Absolutely. So our Brain Injury Speaks network is basically a patient engagement network where we have persons with lived experience, which may be someone who survived a brain injury, someone who has a concussion, or a family member. And our goal with the Brain Injury Speaks network is that we're giving a voice to people who have sustained brain injuries, and we want to engage them in meaningful ways. And so they are a wonderful group to go to. If something, let's say, comes out, for instance, I think it was about a year and a half ago where there was a raise to ODSP. And so what we did was we actually went to our Brain Injury Speaks network and we said, well, how does this increase affect your life? And then we did a whole sort of research on it. And of course, I shouldn't say of course, but not surprisingly, it came back that there are just so many, that little bump, although it was appreciated, it is still not meeting their needs. And there's different statistics, like the majority of people still fall short each month on ODSP, that they rely upon food banks, that they are relying on family and friends, even to just meet their monthly bills. So that's just an example of how the network comes together and we collect information that then we can take to the government and to share with the government, like, these are the needs of people living with brain injury. So that's a little bit about the Brain Injury Speaks. our Return to Work project is a unique project that we just started a couple of years ago. And we did receive funding from the government to do this through an opportunities grant. And what we do is we support both the employer and the employee. And what we really found was that when people who are able to return to work after a concussion or a brain injury, they might have some support, not always. They might have some support, but it still is the employer. We find, and just generally speaking, most people really don't understand brain injury. And so this program supports both the employer and the employee. And the employee gets access to an occupational therapist, a social worker. And we sort of calculated the cost. So it's about $4,000 of free services to an employer who is working with an employee that is coming back to work. And I want to mention when we put forward this grant, an occupational therapist is the one that can assess somebody's ability to return to work, what accommodations they need. But we also really felt it was super important to have a social worker to address the mental health aspect, because we know that with brain injury, there is a high percentage of people who also struggle with mental health. And so we really felt in order for a return to work to be successful, yes, you need the OT, you need the assessments, you need the accommodations, but you also need to address the mental health aspect of the individual.
Of course, and that's very much, and that of course is very much important. And now, on that note, if say a person wanted to get involved with the Return to Work project or the Brain Injury Speaks program, or any other programs and support groups or services that you offer, are there any restrictions to doing so? Say age, caregiver, things of that nature?
I really appreciate that question. And one of the things that is often a barrier to somebody actually receiving services is a formal diagnosis. And OBIA does not require a formal diagnosis because many of the people who have sustained brain injuries might have sustained brain injuries 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They may have never had a formal diagnosis, but we know that they hit their head. We know that they even perhaps lost consciousness. We know that they've been living with the consequences of sustaining a brain injury. And so what makes our program, all of our programs, unique is that we don't require formal diagnosis. And so if somebody self-reports that they've sustained a brain injury, they automatically have access to our programs. And again, we have a lot of different programs, everything from like our 1-800 support line, our helpline, where anybody can call that line, whether that's a survivor brain injury, a family member, even professionals who are looking for resources for their clients. And we're here to help navigate if somebody, let us say that they really need to have certain treatment and they don't have the money for that. So are there community resources that they can tap into? Are there publicly funded organizations that they can go to? So we would help advocate and navigate that. And one of the things that we have done for almost 20 years now is our peer support program. And with our peer support program, we match individuals who have sustained a brain injury with a mentor who has a similar background and experience. So let's say that it was somebody who was 30 years old, they're just starting their career, maybe it's a new dad, and he sustained a brain injury. We would partner that person with somebody similar who has similar experiences as them. And again, we have been running this program for 21 years. Again, it's all free. And I really want to emphasize that all of our programs are free. And sometimes people find it very helpful to talk to somebody else who has walked or still is walking down the same path as they are of brain injury. And so that's also a really key component of what we do. And then, as you mentioned, we have support groups, and those support groups are both for they're concussion support groups, which can be both for we have two separate ones, one for family members, and then one for persons with lived experience. And we've had I don't know the exact number, but well over 600 people attend our groups. And they're all facilitated by a social worker, which I want to add that's really important. And we've just had so much so much success in supporting people throughout the years.
And that's absolutely amazing to hear. And on the note of success, without naming any names, are there any sort of success stories that you could share with us and our listeners today? Perhaps about, the supports that were put into place successfully for someone who asked for that help, or, anything of that, anything along those lines?
Sure, I have lots of success stories, but a new one that comes to mind is from our return to work program, and it was an individual who was working. I won't. I'll just mention in corporate Canada, so to speak, and he had a very unsuccessful return to work, and before we got involved, and we didn't get involved, and his employer agreed to work with us as well. And now he is back doing a fairly high level job, which before he had several fails in the return to work. And with our support, he actually was able to get to return to work. But not everybody can return to work. And how does a person find meaning in their life? And a very dear person and friend to Obaya, and he does not mind if we use his name. His name is Steve. And Steve was in the height of his career as an IT head of IT at a hospital in Toronto. He had close to 100 employees working for him, and he was coming home from work, and a bus literally ran over him, and he sustained a very severe brain injury that he could not return to his work. And his neuropsychologist reached out to us and said, listen, we have somebody, I am working with somebody who, was very high level in his career, but is not able to return. Is there a volunteer position that you have? And so Steve came on as our IT consultant, and he volunteered for us 12 years. He came in the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, like any other person. When he first came in, we used to call him Mr. Suit and Tie because he was always in his suit and tie. But he really found meaning, again, by volunteering with us. And although, you understand somebody, the head of IT, very high level position, comes to Abai, helps us with our computer issues, but really he was just such a wonderful additive to our team. And really we included him as a team member as much as anybody else. And so he found a lot of meaning in his volunteer work. So I want to emphasize that not everybody can go back to work after a brain injury, but it's really important that they find something meaningful and fulfilling. And again, I think of Steve and just how, what a wonderful friend and colleague he is of ours.
Wow, and that story is absolutely amazing to hear. On the one hand, because I can relate to it for personal reasons, but on the other hand, because the message just speaks true, in the sense of you would obviously want to find meaning in whatever it is you do. And on the note of that meaning, if someone wanted to, find that sense of meaning, that sense of purpose, or that sort of fulfilling feeling by, say, volunteering with Obaya, or even becoming a member, what are the respective processes like for both?
Well, I want to mention that Obaya has 22 affiliated community associations across the province. Now, they are all independent, they are autonomous, they have their own boards of directors, but they are affiliated with us. And I know from visiting many community associations across the province, they are on the ground really helping people build a new community, because oftentimes when people sustain brain injuries, they lose their community, and that might be part and due in part to that they have changed, because a brain injury can change somebody. It may be that family members and friends aren't sure now how to relate to them because they might be a different person. And our local community associations do just phenomenal work when it comes to bringing meaning back to those lives who have been shattered by brain injury. And so, I won't name them all, but for instance, like the Brain Injury Association of Windsor, of London, of Ottawa, of Sudbury, of Sault Ste. Marie, of Niagara. So they're all across the province, and they have meaningful programs for survivors of brain injury, but they also have just social group. And so there might be a card night, or they might actually go bowling together. And the most important word that comes to my mind truly is community. And they find a new community there. And some of them certainly volunteer also at that level as well. So I encourage anybody who is listening to this that is looking for a community, contact us at Obaya, and we're happy to share with them the local community association that's in their area and how they can become involved.
And that's absolutely amazing to know. I remembered you mentioning bowling or even card nights. Now, one could even argue that they are. One could argue that they are events in their own way, shape, or form. But other than the community that Obaya is looking to sort of support and foster, and those other events like bowling or even card nights that you mentioned, are there any other sort of events or anything like that are coming up for the organization, either that you'll be hosting or that you'll be taking part in? And to that end, what do you think that you could give us a little bit more insight into Brain Injury Awareness Month and how that all plays into it?
Brain Injury Awareness Month is huge, and this is where every provincial association in Canada, every local association in Canada gets involved with spreading awareness about brain injury. And this year, we are doing a focus on unmasking brain injury. So unmasking brain injury, and you can go to our website, which I'm sure you'll mention, but it's www.obia.ca. If you go to the unmasking page, you will see pages and pages of masks that have been painted by survivors of brain injury and some family members. And on this mask, they really paint their story, their journey. And then underneath, there's a little explanation, a little written explanation about their journey. And we started this Unmasking Brain Injury a number of years ago, and it has been the most successful awareness campaign that I think we have ever ran. And because these masks, I mean, they're art and they're telling a story. And even I think it was 2018 or so, or 17, we were even at Queen's Park, and we brought 50 different masks. And at lunch hour, the MPPs came and looked at these masks. And these masks have been all over the province. They have been in malls, they have been in art galleries, they have been in libraries, and it really brings a personal story to brain injury. And so this year for brain injury, we're doing Unmasking Brain Injury Then and Now. And the focus of this campaign is to show that brain injury is not static. So some members who might have made a mask, let's just say 5 or 6 years ago, they're going to create a new mask about where they're at in this journey now. Because the message really is that brain injury is not static. Brain injury, it can get better over time, and sometimes it can get worse over time. Each person's journey is very, very different. And so we will be unmasking brain injury, bringing light to brain injury through this. Another aspect of the campaign also is bringing attention to the opioid crisis. And as we know, there are many, many people who may have accidental overdoses and survive, but now they're surviving with a brain injury. Because if somebody has a drug overdose and they have a certain amount of time where their brain does not receive oxygen, they sustain a brain injury. And so this is a silent epidemic that is happening. Of course, the opioid crisis is terrible and it's in the news. But one of the things that we're not talking about is what happens to that person if they survive the overdose. In many cases, they sustain a brain injury, and for the most part, don't even realize they've sustained a brain injury. So that is what we're really doing this month as far as campaigning across the province. There's going to be events all across the province with our brain injury associations, and you can go to our website and look and find the Brain Injury Association in your area. Just click on it and you will see what they're doing locally. I also wanted to mention that we are having a mix and mingle in Toronto. We're partnering with the Brain Injury Association in Toronto and we're having a mix and mingle. And this is a fundraiser that supports both the Brain Injury Society of Toronto and OBIA. And so this is predominantly for professionals to come and mix and mingle, but everybody is welcome. And then I do want to mention that we're having a provincial conference. It's not till November, but we're in the throes of getting it together. And we usually have between 600 to 700 people at this conference. And we always have a stream of sessions for survivors and family members. And then, of course, we have many streams for professionals as well. And that's held in Niagara Falls. And so that's coming up. But if you want to see what's happening locally in your area, go to our website, click on community associations, and you'll find there's just so many wonderful, wonderful awareness activities happening around the province.
Well, and that's absolutely great to know. And I'm sure that our listeners out there would definitely be interested as well. So before I ask you anything else related to whatever campaigning you're doing and things of that nature, I want to take a little time to ask you my favorite question, something that I ask all of our guests on this segment. Though I think you've already dropped a lot of Easter eggs as to how you could potentially answer. So, in your opinion, what's one thing that you see happening repeatedly to individuals with disabilities that shouldn't be, and how do we collectively go about stopping it?
Brain injury continues to be the invisible disability. And oftentimes, there may be some people who have outward signs of a brain injury. They might walk with a limp, they could be in a wheelchair, but most do not. And so oftentimes people are really unaware about the invisible disabilities. They're unaware about the cognitive effects, about the emotional effects that brain injury has. And, I remember talking to somebody who said, my mild to moderate brain injury, no one can see it. I walk fine, I talk fine, I look fine. But because of my cognitive functioning, I will never be able to return to the classroom as a teacher. And so again, if you met him today, and his name is Tom, if you met him, you'd have no clue that he had a brain injury. And so I think that the most important thing is that brain injury still can be largely invisible, and it often still goes undiagnosed or it's misdiagnosed. And this is a real problem. Fortunately, I'm going to say that with concussions coming to the forefront in the news over the last decade or so, I think more concussions are being diagnosed. But, I can share an example of somebody who tripped on the sidewalk, fell face down, really injured his face, went to emergency. They checked him out. They cleaned him up. He had broken some teeth. They said, go home, go to your dentist. They never checked him if he had a concussion or a brain injury. And he did go to his dentist, and he was telling his dentist, I can't focus. I can't concentrate. I have extreme headaches, fatigue, etc. And the dentist said, did the ER check you out for concussion or head injury? And he's like, no. He said, you need to do this right now. You need to get to emergency and get them checked out. And he had sustained quite a significant brain injury. So this is happening still. And so this is where we need to get the message out. If somebody in any way trips, falls, hits their head, and has some significant, symptoms, I don't want to scare everybody that if you accidentally bump your head, you have a concussion. But if you start to have symptoms like nausea, dizziness, unclear thinking, you need to go seek help immediately.
And that is a very good message to get across. Thank you for that, Ruth. Now, to that end, circling back to the to what I mentioned, what I mentioned earlier, before we made this pivot, about your campaigning, events, programs, and services. If our listeners are looking for more information, again, on the campaigning that you're doing, the programs and services you offer, how they can get involved, anything and everything along those lines, how can they find you? How can they reach you? Although I think you've mentioned a few of those ways earlier on, but do you think that you could go over them one more time?
Sure. So our website is www.obia.ca. We also have a 1-800 helpline, which is 1-800-263 5404, so people can call that, or they can just email us generally at obia, obia at obia, obia.on.ca. And if people can go to our website, there's actually a whole list of our staff. And if somebody's looking for a support group, they can actually contact them directly. If they're looking for peer support, you'll see who you can contact. If they're looking for the return to work, you can see who to contact. So really going to our website is the best place to go. And everybody at Obaya is absolutely willing to help in any way that we can. And I just before we sign off, I want to say that our organization was started by two families that came together around a kitchen table whose children had sustained brain injuries. And at that point, over 35 years ago, there was little support for those living with brain injuries and even less support for family members. And so our roots come from two family members sitting around a table. And so we always want to keep in the forefront that we are here for survivors of brain injury and their family members.
Well, on that note, Ruth, that's amazing to know. And honestly, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. This conversation was extremely insightful, and honestly, we were just happy to have these little gems dropped on us today. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome, and just really, I thank you for having me as well, and for the opportunity to get the message out to that there is hope, there is help. Contact us. We're here for you.
Well, thank you for that. And with that, we've reached the end of yet another amazing interview. You're listening to Community Partners presented by Voices for Ability Radio. All abilities, all the time. I'm your host, Davy O. Be safe, be kind, and I'll see y'all next time.